Call the special meeting for the City of East Grand Forks to order. Tuesday, June 27th, now 5 o'clock. Executive Assistant, please call roll.
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Mike Pachavinsky.
Here.
Tim Riepel.
Here.
Henry Tweeten. Mark Demers.
Does term of quorum. Consider adopting resolution number 17-06-47, authorizing the transfers for budget year 2016. Moved by Mr. Tweeden.
Second.
Second by Mr. Vetter. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Pachavinsky.
Yes.
Riepel.
Yes.
Tweeten. Olstead.
Yes.
Grassel.
Yes.
Vetter.
Yes.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Moved by Pachavinsky.
Second.
Second by Mr. Riepel. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. Special meeting is now adjourned. Call to order the work session for the City of East Grand Forks, Tuesday, June 27, 2017. Executive Assistant, please call roll.
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Mike Pachavinsky.
Here.
Tim Riepel.
Here.
Henry Tweeten. Mark Demers.
Present.
Does term quorum. I'm going to move the items around on the sheet to allow some people to attend some events later here. So what I'm going to do is start with number 4, request for all fall ice VFW arena. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a few guests here from both the Blue Line Club and a few from the Arts and Crafts Show Council to go through this or be able to answer any questions you guys may have as we go through this a little bit. There have become a few moving parts to the request that started from the Blue Line Club. Their president, Phil Hartwig, is here to be able to offer ice essentially a month earlier in the fall. The first question he had for me is, would it ever be feasible or possible for us to put ice in a month in for the month of September and still be able to have the Arts and Crafts Show and then continue on with our regularly scheduled ice season that usually starts kind of middle of October. And I said that anything is possible and we can certainly look at it, so that's kind of where we're at here today. I handed out an additional attachment for all of you guys that runs through 2 separate estimates of the city's cost to run the ice arena for a month. One side of it is to run it for, and the dates are flexible still, but to run it for basically 38 days, which would mean that we would put in ice starting in late August, run ice, rent it out to the Blue Line Club for the month of September, roughly September 4th to September 29th, and then take out the ice in about a 3 or 4 day period so that the craft show could continue with their regularly scheduled annual event October 7th and 8th in the VFW arena. And then the conversation has continued from there, which is why the craft show people are here tonight. I have had a couple of conversations with them on whether or not there would be any other homes in East Grand Forks that may be possible to do that, which would make it more feasible for us to have ice in the fall, because we could essentially start the Blue Line Club's fall camps a couple weeks later and start ice maybe middle of September and then carry it through the entire ice season without having to take it out just to go ahead and put it back in a few days later. So I think maybe a couple different things that we could do just to carry on a little bit further in conversation with the Arts and Crafts Council. Lorraine O'Shea is here tonight. I visited with her yesterday by telephone, and she voiced that this year, from their perspective, it would be very difficult to move the craft show. They have already published information on the locations and the dates of that. That'd be one big obstacle for them. Another would be that they don't know that there is another home in East Grand Forks of the size or the amenities that the VFW arena has to fit that. They typically have 94 booths in the VFW, and they don't know of any other locations that would be able to meet those needs. So it would be difficult from their perspective to be able to do anything differently this year with that. So if we were to continue on and try to offer ice to meet the requests of the Blue Line Club for the month of September. That is the left column with the estimated cost. I've had a few conversations with Simco Refrigeration, the company that did the overhaul on the compressor system, and asked for some of their knowledge on if we have the capability to do it from a compressor or refrigeration standpoint, the building standpoint. They feel we do. They say we have more than enough horsepower in our machines to be able to start making ice in August and hold it. The one question that they would have is, because we don't have a dehumidifier in the building, is whether or not we'd have an issue of condensation and hot temperatures like that that could cause the building to sweat, so to speak, on the inside and drip from the ceiling. We've been fortunate this year. It's been kind of a cool June, but in past Junes we have had, fairly substantial heat that we may see in late August. And in talking with Jim Enright and the Blue Line Club, they think that we'd be okay there. We've run fans and brought in fresh air from outside and been able to keep down some of that moisture. So just again, coming at it from a lot of perspectives. The handout you have, if you look at the back side, that goes through, or page 2, that goes through just where some of these costs came from on the average amount of water we use, the average kilowatt hours used, and the prices of those. Working with both Ms. Anderson and Ms. Abel from Water and Light to come up with these costs.
A couple questions I do have. When you have no ice on there, what is normally done in there? Is there maintenance that you guys do at that time period? And if so, when would that be done? During the period before, if there's time to do it? And what preventive stuff that you do to make sure? Good question. This off season, the biggest indoor project that would need to be done from a regularly scheduled maintenance already has been with the overhaul of the compressor. That would be one thing. And then general cleaning and painting, just some indoor touch-up of painting. That could easily still be done in the month of July and August to be able to be ready for September ice. Typically, Dale Gulbranson, the arena manager there, he spends a small amount of time working in the arena in the summer months. For the most part, he uses it just to check in and use it as his office. But other than that, he spends more time outside. So that would probably be the bigger question there is, if we started a month early, that we'd have to be okay with hiring some part-time staff to work the arena that we wouldn't regularly hire, and having our arena manager spending more time indoors in the month of September than they typically do.
And I guess my worry is with craft show is I don't want to, this, how many years has this gone on? 45. So, I mean, it's something that's been in the community for a long time. And also the hockey camps, and hockey has been in the community forever too. So it's something that East Grand Forks has and is proud to have every year. And I think I'm willing to work and see what we can do to make sure it does happen, because I think they're both very important on both sides. And if getting done and turning the plan off on September 29th and getting cleaned up in August 2nd through the 5th, I mean, that leaves enough time to have the craft fair, right? Correct? There's no issues with that?
Yeah, for this year. Next year might be, different. Yeah, but I'm assuming you want to keep doing this every year. Start it earlier. It might be a little harder, because some years it's October 1st and 2nd.
Okay.
Last year it was October 1st and 2nd.
Whatever the calendar falls. Okay.
It's always the first week.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else, Cindy? There?
Question, about how many participants would be at a hockey camp at that time?
Right now, for our summer camp, the month of June, we surpassed over 500.
About how many come from local and how many from out of the area, roughly?
We're at 1/3 is out of the area.
I was just thinking that it's really quite an economic benefit, I think, to have these events. The whole community, I think, benefits from these.
Yeah, it's actually 29% is out.
Yeah. And And I'm with you also, just on record, I feel both of these are very, very important, and I could certainly justify making the accommodation to make them both happen, in my mind, just from that greater economic impact of both of the events. We know what arts and crafts does, it's huge.
Mr. Newers.
Reid, are these cost to run numbers, are those above and beyond your budgeted, budgeted numbers, or are they inclusive of your typical budget? Because obviously you already scheduled, or you already had budgeted for the arts and crafts, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, from an expense standpoint, I didn't take a lot of time to look at how it impacted the overall annual budget, because this is all, my thought process was this entire cost would be borne by the Blue Line Club in a rental fee, much like they do the month of June. We would rent it to them to cover the entire cost of operating the building. That's what this proposed column would be. So how it impacts, the dollars, it certainly, without stopping and looking at what it would do with the budget, the annual budget, I would say, yeah, it's going to change it, because it's part-time employees for an extra month that we didn't plan for.
okay.
But the revenues from the rent would certainly offset all of that.
Okay, and that's what I was going to ask is, could you clarify for me what the rental revenues are, or the agreements, or proposed agreements? What
Yeah.
do we already have?
And we haven't even, to be clear, Phil and I haven't discussed even what the total rental price would be. I wanted to start here with making sure that each of you had what we estimated it to cost us to do it, and I would think that it'd be fair to, if it was all the same to you guys, I would say we rent it for as near the cost as it can, because it's bringing more economic impact into the community, and in the end, when everything comes full circle, just about everything the Blue Line Club makes comes back to the kids in our community anyway. So essentially that's what we do with the Summer Ice the month of June. We just barely cover our cost, and that's
Well,
what our rental
I
rate
guess
is.
I don't think anybody here is looking to
Right.
make profit on it, I think, but so you're talking
So-
about the
so I-
14.5 number?
Yeah, I would say 14.5 would be 14.5, 15,000 in that area would be the safe rental number to cover. The one thing that this doesn't include, and frankly it doesn't because I don't really know how to quantify it, is depreciation. I got some depreciation numbers from Ms. Anderson, but to be able to equate those to a rental I think is difficult, so I just left them out.
1 month, it's going to depreciate that month, whether
Right.
we do it or not.
Right.
Is that on Mr. Demers?
That's it, thank you.
Mr. Grasso?
I have no problem with putting it in and taking it out and putting it back in. And maybe those two groups could get together and somehow figure out what could happen for next year. How successful you guys will be this year is going to depend, I suppose, on what's going on. So I firmly believe, I think that we should move forward with putting it on, taking it off, and putting it back on for this year, just so that those two groups have an opportunity to try to get their events in, and let the Blue Line Club figure out if it's something that they want to tackle again next year.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Or questions for anybody here that's attending? Sounds like everybody's in agreement that this is going to work, and Reid is going to do what we need to do to make sure it's taken care of.
Just keep the roof on.
Right.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it.
I'll move back to number 1, discussion on the 15 AJ2 assessment rule. Mr. Emery.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to have some, general discussion with you tonight. We're going to be receiving bids for the paving project out on Woods 5th and 6th on July 6th. Our intent is to utilize those as-bid costs, put together the potential assessment for the residents out in those two subdivisions. And the intent is to get those notices out basically the next, to the residents the next day. So I guess kind of the question, for the council is, as I informed you, we kind of broke the project into a proposal 1, proposal 2. So when we basically calculate those as-bid costs and assessments, do you want to include essentially the 162 feet of Brandon Boulevard that's kind of been in question, or do we not include them in the numbers that we send out to the residents for the final assessment hearing?
You talking Brandon, or are you talking
Brandon.
Henry? Your mic's not on though.
First thing, I think that in the future in development agreements, we should quit cul-de-sacs. Cul-de-sacs have been causing problems, and it causes problems on snow removal. The second thing is, I think that before developers take and submit a plat or go ahead and file a plat, that should be given to probably the planning commission first, and then come on to the council. The third thing is that I would make the payments on assessments equal. If you start off a little easy, somebody's going to say, well, I didn't budget for that. They forget. Whatever your assessments are going to be, make it equal all the way across the board. And the other thing is, we know we had problems. We were threatened to be sued on this assessment, that the infrastructure's got to be in before people can start building. There's no reason why the council should be sitting and dancing to any developer. I don't care who it is. We do it in an orderly manner, and everybody understands where they're at. The council is constantly being put on the defensive. That's not a very good way to run development. I think we're going to, I'm an optimist. I'm convinced that we have an opportunity to have considerable residential development, twin home development in the next few years. But let's do it in such a manner that we don't, like I say, get behind the 8 ball all the time. There's no reason for it. We can have better planning by developers.
Mr. Emery, can you go through proposal 1 and 2, why and what would be left off? Are we talking about the easement there? Is that what it is? Or what are we, do you want to maybe go through that so that we have a clearer?
Yeah, proposal 1, we basically broke the bid into 2 proposals, kind of at the request of the residents when we held the initial improvement hearing. So what proposal 1 included was paving all of Brandon Boulevard minus essentially the 162 feet coming off of Laurel Drive. So it includes everything on Brandon Boulevard. It includes the paving of the 2 cul-de-sacs, Nate Circle and Crystal Circle. And then proposal 2 is essentially just that 162 feet of paving on Brandon Boulevard. Again, being that's the piece that's kind of caused all the contention. The thought was we would just bid that separate so we know exactly what that cost is, and whether it's decided to include it, take it out, we know exactly what that cost is. So the intent is the project's going to be awarded based on the lowest cost for proposal 1 and 2. We're not going to separate it out, or we're not going to do proposal 1 without proposal 2 type of thing. But again, just to easily separate that so there's no question.
So you're just asking for the okay for us to allow the proposals to look this way and not that we're leaving anything out?
What I'm asking for permission on is we open bids on July 6th. Based on the as-bid cost, we're going to put together the final assessment roll, which Megan is going to send out the notices the next day, so July 7th. Megan will mail out all the notices to the residents, notifying them of the final assessment hearing on August 1st and what their, let's say, assessment cost is. So what that final assessment cost is makes a big difference if you include that 162 feet of cost or if you don't include it. So I guess I just want some direction from the council. You know what I mean?
Well, my thought is, there's, either way you do it, there's the same amount of people that you're looking at.
Correct.
This has nothing to do with Laurel Drive.
That's correct.
So the way we said to move forward with it, now everything's done, it's the same amount of people. They're just asking to find out if that small portion, 162 feet, which would be run from the end of the cul-de-sac, 162 feet toward the west, correct?
Yep.
So if we are proposing and have the bids out for 1 and 2, at that time, I mean, who's going to decide that we're not going to do the 162 feet?
May I respond to that?
But that's why are we worried about the 162 feet? Because I'm not going to go on to Lower Drive because we already voted on the one, proposal number 1 when we did this in the first place.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
In looking at our policy and in discussing it with the last 3 city engineers, including the one before us, our policy coming in with a new development that runs through and that connects out to another development, our policy has been to have special assessments to the existing street. That has been our policy for all the way back 20 to 30 years. We chose not to do that on this development, and partly because the way it showed up for that end benefit on Laurel Drive, those numbers I think were higher than any of us felt were justified for those families on Laurel. And so I think even had I been able to vote, in fact I signed that thing, I would have gone the way the council went. It was just those numbers were too high. And so we've gone forward with a plan to basically put all of the cost of this onto Brandon, which does go against our policy. And there may be a way for us to take out that 162 feet, not put it on Laurel, but to find another source of funds to cover that, so as not to overload the families on Brandon with specials above and beyond what's reasonable or what would be defensible. We already have a total of 9 or 12 people challenging it, ready to challenge it in every way that's available to them. And I believe we're going to need to find a way to reach out to those folks in a way that says, look, folks, this is as far as we can go to make this affordable to those families on Brandon. And without, we cannot, you're absolutely right, Mr. President, we cannot go back now and put, for this year, for this effort, and then benefit back onto Laurel. You could do it next year. If this thing fails, you could turn around and reopen it and restart it for the 3rd time, which I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to frustrate that neighborhood any more than we have to. So if we get competitive bids this year, I believe we need to find a way to get this thing done. And in my estimation, the best way to get it done is to find a source of funds to cover the 162 feet. Not onto Laurel Drive, not onto Brandon, but some street funds that we have available within the city. That is how it appears to me as a fair way for it to get done this year, if we get competitive bids. If we don't, it won't go this year, and it shouldn't. But if we get good, honest, competitive bids, we need to find a way to get it done this year. And putting it all on Brandon is not the way, cost-wise. It's not the best way.
Clarify for me, if you can, if Mr. Emery, whoever it is, when we did Laurel Drive and did the assessments, was the assessments request the way it was done, the way it was set up, and how the developments were done, Laurel Drive then to Brandon, was that on the request from the developer to do it this way? Originally?
Sewer water?
Or when we originally did this? Is this not a request that came in from Mr. Peabody?
I'm sorry, and the question you're asking, is it for the curb, gutter, sewer, water, or for the paving?
Both.
One of the options that the developer did ask us to look at when we were looking at the paving was to look at the option of doing the ed benefits on Laurel Drive, which again, in the reported feasibility, if you remember, we had, I think, 3 different proposals that we did look at, and one of those proposals did include the end benefits on Laurel Drive.
Let's go back when Laurel Drive was done originally, and then, what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about when Brandon Boulevard was gonna get done. Was that even platted? Was it even done, recorded? Was the recorded plat done, Brandon?
Because when Laurel Drive was initially constructed with the utilities and essentially just the street with the curb and gutter and the gravel driving surface, Point Woods 5th and 6th were not even platted. In fact, the curb returns into what is now Brandon Boulevard weren't even put in. That curb and gutter went straight through. So at that time, when it was 5th or 6th, there didn't even exist.
But when the street was paved, we had approved that plat.
When
The
it was,
Brandon
yeah,
Boulevard plat.
yep.
Yes.
When Laurel Drive was paved is the time that the curb returns went into the Point of Woods 5th area.
Mr. Goldston?
I guess the question that I have is can't you just bid it out as one? I mean, what's the cost difference? It's gonna be linear square foot, you're gonna, 162 or the entire lot, you can just back out the 162 feet, correct?
Yeah, there's a few components to that 162 feet, but
I guess my biggest fear is that you're gonna have, you might increase the bids amount depending upon if you're gonna, the way you're structuring it. For once, bid on 162, bid on 1,000, and then, are you gonna say, and then bid the whole project? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly
Yeah.
how you're gonna do it, but it's gonna get kind of confusing on how you're structuring this just for the purpose of pulling out 162 feet.
the way it's set up, there is a proposal 1, proposal 2, but I do say right below that on the bid form that the contract will be awarded based off the lowest bid of proposal 1 plus proposal 2.
My opinion, I think to do it as one.
And again, I mean, I could go back and I could make it one bid.
You're gonna be able to back out the cost. I don't think you're gonna have a substantial amount of money that's gonna change if you decide you wanna come up with some other option to put 162 feet instead of confusing the bid specifications and getting it out there by splitting it up into 2 separate projects.
It's been published already, right? It's already been published that way.
But I can always change the bid form through an addendum. I mean, if you wanted to bid it as just strictly one project, no separate proposals, I mean, we can do that.
I guess I didn't know that.
Mr. Norris?
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I kind of had some of the same concerns as Mr. Gall said. I wonder what the purpose, I guess, of having 2 proposals is. If it's just to save us from doing some math at the end, that doesn't make any sense, because if you're going to put, I don't know if you're going to put the whole construction in option 1 and option 2, and what if the mob rate on this side is different than the mob rate on the second? I don't even know how you put all that stuff together, but my point is what happens if the rate for 162 feet is different than the rate for everything else? Then you're going to have a whole nother problem. I guess my point is, build the project, it's what the cost. If you have to figure out what 162 feet of it costs, that's a easier problem for us to figure out. It's a math problem. Whereas everything else, all of a sudden, if you start skewing the rates within it, then you can't do a one-to-one problem or whatever.
Didn't you say, though, that parts of this in the cul-de-sac, for example, are a pour hand finish, and other parts are more full mechanized?
Yeah, I mean,
So there is a difference based on
the cost with those 2 cul-de-sacs, I mean, are going to potentially drive up the overall project cost some. So I suppose there is that possibility if you did the proposal 1, proposal 2. I think proposal 1, if nothing else, the unit price is going to come in cheaper. Because
That's
everything
right.
on Brandon Boulevard is going to be machine paving.
Yes.
If anything's going to be higher, it's going to be the work associated with the 2 cul-de-sacs.
And that's fine. If we want to do it that way, I think you open yourself up to more problems, but if.
And again,
if
I
you
can do it
don't-
either way. Again, I did what I did, right or wrong. I did it because of the message I got at the improvement hearing. Those residents wanted to see what that cost was for the 162 feet, so, but I can always change it.
And that's, I guess I'm not completely opposed to keeping going or whatever, but it's just, that's one of my concerns. Second, if you do the assessment roll on this, what's to stop us from doing, or issuing the assessment roll or issuing the notices for the assessment roll on like the 14th instead of the 7th?
Well, the biggest thing is just timing, when you got to get notices out, when you got to publish it in the paper.
Or I mean, not on the, but on the 7th, on the 14th.
The thing is just your timing for your notices, and
Basically, it'll include one in the paper, on the changes that we following and trying to out. These about 2 weeks prior to, it's only required about 2 weeks prior to, but just in case something else is bad, that we can work on this.
I guess, and I have a little different take than maybe the mayor or the president. I've thought about this quite a bit, as I think a lot of people here put a lot of brain power, a lot of sweat and pencils to this. I initially looked at this project, and when I first looked at it, I said, it's not how we've done things in the past. We shouldn't look to the folks on Laurel Drive at all. The developer asked, I talked to the developer, I know Chad talked to the developer about this, and he proposed, doing an end benefit to all, or X number of properties on Laurel for the entire project. We looked at that as a council and said that doesn't really make sense. That isn't consistent with our policy. But as I look at it and look at how it was developed, how the plats were developed, the history of how the project's developed, I can see some evidence that would suggest that the folks, at least the people, well, I could say on both sides, but I would propose that the folks on the east side of Laurel Drive, X number of lots either way of Brandon, do have some responsibility for not the entire thing, but the 162 feet. The reason is because that is part of that development. When this was done, and I don't know what the motives were at the time or not, but that portion was left out. It should have been included when we did Laurel Drive. It was platted as such. Originally, like Mr. Emery said, it went straight through. In fact, they were going to put a bike trail down there. But things changed when it came to paving. We decided we're going to do the paving. The curb returns were put in. We should have, at that point, recommended that the paving goes all the way to the edge of the development. That's why I think those people should be, if it would have done property back then, we would have done it that way. So in a sense, they were saved a little bit of money on the front end, and I think that 162 feet, if you just take that portion out of the entire project, it makes for a bit. It's not the 7,000 or 8,000 people we're looking to spend. It's closer to 3,000 or 4,000 over 20 years, and I think that it ends up being, if we think about it, fair. And there's been a lot of talk about the developer or whatever, what their motives are, and frankly, the developer, when it was said to me, was they wanted to assess end benefits on the entire of those properties, which the developer still owns some of those properties. So he was talking about assessing himself as well. Now, he doesn't own the majority, I don't think. I don't know how many he owns, but he would be assessed again on this portion as well. But other than that, I think sometimes you have to admit when you're initially wrong. That's one of the things we have to do to come up with compromises here. It might make some people on Laurel Drive angry or whatever, but I think compared to the initial proposal, this is quite a bit. It's more sane for sure, and it's logically defensible. I think, like I said, our policy has been to do, in a new development, you do your development and the area that's in that project. And that portion was in that development at that time. It should have been done, and that's my position. The reason why I asked about the 14th is if we were to send out notices to everybody in that group, I think you have to give them 10 days before a hearing. I don't know. Megan would be is the expert on this, but that would get that with the holiday and a couple days for delivery. That would be the 14th of July. So if you put off,
Just a point of clarification, are you talking about sending notices to Laurel Drive?
yes.
That would reset this whole process, because they have to get a notice of the opening hearing, they have to have their initial hearing. So that would make us start.
Unless they waived their,
Unless you didn't all waive their right.
right. And that's what I'm wondering, is if we want to talk to them and see, bring them in for the 14th, see if, we can tell, or I'll tell them, I don't, I would suggest that that's the route to go if we want to get this done in, to me, that's the fairest way, is have them pay some, have the folks on Brandon and Nathan and, what's the other? Crystal.
Yeah, sorry.
Circles pay for the other chunk and the cul-de-sacs, and move forward on that. Now, you might, I don't know if you'd get waivers from all of them. I would imagine the developer would sign off on it. I can't speak for them, but I know it's less than the original proposal they had suggested. And you're talking about how many other properties out there, 4 or 5?
I think the big question you'd have to decide then is how many lots going north and how many lots going south?
I think Steve's,
Because originally, the way it was done was they considered it one block from the corner of Brandon and Laurel all the way out to Reinhardt Drive, and then split that in two, and it ended up at Hodges' on.
They
Yeah, I
basically
think
went
there
to
was-
Huttunen right on the corner.
But that wasn't typically the way we would have done our special assessment policy, by going halfway down the block. Halfway down the block would be about two lots north and 2 lots south, as opposed to 5 or 6 lots north and 5 or 6 lots.
but wasn't the 13th portion of Laurel, that was assessed differently, wasn't, that was prepaid.
That was put in by the developer and paid by the developer.
So it
there were
wasn't,
no special
there was no
assessments.
specials over there, so. I think you used I thought there was 7 or 9 lots total. I thought it went.
It was 4 or 5
9.
going north and 4 or 5 going south.
I would use that same model that we first used and just use the 162 to divide by that, and instead of the entire length of the project, and I think you come up with a better number. Like I said, I'm sure by saying this, I haven't won any friends on Laurel Drive because, but I think if we're all honest with ourselves and we all look at this take a step back, remove the emotions or any of the players involved in it and say, well, what portion should have been done when and by who, I think that's the reality of what would have happened. Like I said, if in 2002 or 3 or whenever we did that Laurel Drive, if it would have been included. And like I said, I don't know who said don't do that or why we didn't do that or for what reason, but it should have been done to the back of the property line, and that's my opinion.
Mr. Grasson.
Do we know how many times Brandon Boulevard, that plat was replatted? Was it just one, or was it twice? Was it 3 times? So there might be a reason why those returns weren't put back the 162 feet, is because the fact that the plat was put in and then redone and then redone. If I'm not,
Yep.
My research-
Originally platted, and it didn't get recorded by the developer, and it was replatted, to go from single, or from duplex or townhomes to single family, and then the third section was platted.
so that might be an answer to the question of why it wasn't ran back in 162 feet.
But the property corners were always the same through that easement. It was just how it was subdivided, right?
I believe so, yeah.
I mean, they always knew that they were going to have,
Yeah.
once the paving came in, they knew what those property corners were. So
The
that,
other reason it wasn't done is it didn't go anywhere, and there was no urgency to have it done. If we're willing to come back and do an end benefit, now as that street is being paved, it's kind of 6 1 half dozen of the other. It didn't go anywhere, and nobody absolutely needed it to do anything.
So if you had to guesstimate, how much would it cost for that 162, or that 162 feet?
I think that,
42,000 and something.
so yeah, I was going to say 45. I want to say it equated to about $3,000 to $4,000 per lot on Laurel Drive. Over 20 years.
We're basically going to be asking the families on Laurel, those affected families, to come on in and voluntarily say, yes, please, I would like some special assessments.
well, I would say that may or may not be true. I guess.
We have no legal, in this
Why
moment
do-
right now.
Why don't we?
Because the date passed about
What
2
date?
months ago in the initial
When we did the
hearing.
improvement
When
hearing,
we
they were not
elected
included.
the decision which said nothing onto Laurel,
Well,
that day passed.
So, I guess I'm trying to say,
So essentially, when we did the improvement hearing, if we wanted to do the end benefits, those people along Laurel Drive should have got notification and should have been able to attend the improvement hearing.
my point is you could on the 7th, or you could do today, or tomorrow, I guess it's a little late to get the mail out today. You could send out notices as a new project hearing today, which would give you 10 days to have the hearing, which would be the 14th-ish, which would say that's a new project. You can do your assessment after the project. You can do the assessment hearing whenever. You don't have to do it before the project. We didn't do it before the project until probably 2010 or 11. So
Well, you're saying we could do the assessment before or after the project?
we could do the assessment hearing after the project.
But the problem with that is, the intent of ours is, in the period in which people could file an appeal, we're going to wait until that date ends before we actually award the bid and commit to doing the project. Otherwise, if there would be any sort of challenge, we'd pay the difference.
Right, and if you do a project and you do the assessment roll before, and there's any change, you pay the difference. So, I mean, there's risk either way. I'm just saying,
Well, there shouldn't be any change because you've got the bids from the project. is out
right,
there,
but there's,
so you only
have you ever seen a
minimum-
project?
well, but
I
you're-
mean,
Yeah, but you should only have a minimal change order at some point.
well, and that's how much weight you put behind how much people are gonna, you can file an appeal, doesn't mean that you're gonna end up paying it. I mean, it's just, I'm just saying it's not a given either. I'm just, if the goal is to get this done, get it done in the fairest possible manner, I guess, yes, there's a potential that you would have an appeal. So say someone appeals, it's not like they're gonna reduce down to zero. And they might reduce it by $500, they might reduce it by whatever. So my point is what's our priority? Is it to get it done and get it done fairly, or is it to, I don't know, what the
Is it a priority to get it done this year? Because if you want to get it done this year, I think you got to go down this route. If you don't want to get it done this year, I think you start it over.
Or you go down the other route, which is find a source of funds equaling roughly 42,000 to get this thing done. To me, it's the right thing with people on Brandon, and it's a way to honor the movement that we made, which is not to have assessments on Laurel this year.
So where do you say we get the $42,000 from? That's not a taxpayer money.
We should talk some more.
That Joe Blow on North End or the middle of town pays.
Yep.
Or even on the south.
How about, can we, and this is for Mr. Murphy and also for you, Carla, state aid maintenance funds. State aid maintenance funds. This is a street fund that we have available for various kinds of transportation, street-type projects. We do have a positive fund balance that would easily cover this. If this is an approved use from inside that fund, that would be, if you ask me, the logical place where it would come from. It's not taxpayer dollars, it's intended for streets and infrastructure.
So what if it's not an approved use of the funds?
Let's ask that right now. I've been told that it is, but is there anyone who would say otherwise?
That you can use maintenance funds for new construction?
Now, you got to read, farther down into it as to the intent of those funds. And so please, anybody staff who know about it, tell me.
Steve's our state aid.
Yeah, it's my understanding, I mean, that would be an allowable use. I mean, we could always double check that with the state, but, it's my understanding that you could use your state aid maintenance funds for that. You couldn't use your state aid allocation dollars, but your maintenance funds you can.
One way that this kind of takes on the feel of maintenance is, what if you have Laurel Drive that's already built? And what if over here you have Brandon Boulevard that extends to 162 feet of Laurel Drive? And now you want to connect the two.
It's new construction.
It's a way of taking care of your street infrastructure.
I'll just let you know, I'm not going to vote in any way, shape, or form of taking maintenance dollars from the rest of the city and putting it into a new development construction. I won't do it.
It happens to just be the name of the fund, but it's used for street projects of various kinds.
I don't think it's been used for new construction.
Mr. Vedder.
My question would be with those maintenance funds, it seems like we've always got enough projects to use those dollars. So my question to the staff is, what projects do we have come up that we are anticipating using those funds for, and now those projects aren't going to get done because we want to use this money on Brandon Boulevard?
Anything stacked up?
When Mayor Gander asked me, I went through in 2017 improvements, have all been covered. So those would be not only improvements where we have to pay for the mill and overlay that property we own or that we are assessed for, but also for the corner of 5th and 20th is we have covered. So the only thing that would not be on there is projects that we're looking at 2018. I know that we're looking at 20th Street and 8th or 5th. 5th is very bad, and we know that would be a very heavy burden to put on the taxpayers. So that would be something we would use out of that fund. Otherwise, and in the roundabout, if we went that direction, those are what we have, to my knowledge, in the future.
I would bet if you said to Jason, is there $40,000 worth of street construction we could do, and he's going for, or maintenance, he could find it. So, I mean, just because there's a balance there right now doesn't mean that there isn't a need, I would say.
But he also has this $250 balance on the general fund that he uses for those kind of repairs. So this is kind of another fund to cover those projects, like repairs of the streets. The big problems, improvements that we had in 2015, 16, and 17, which we're hoping we won't be doing now for another 7 to 10 years.
I'm just saying,
it all once.
look down Big Lynn Drive. I mean,
$1,000
there's lineal cracks right down Big Lynn Drive the whole way. So there's lots of maintenance to do on our streets. So put that in construction dollars or new construction, I won't. I will strongly advocate against doing that.
So right now, we're at, what do you want from us, Mr. Emery, right now? I don't even know. Do we bid it the way you want to bid it, 1 and 2, or all together? Then go into the fact of suggestion of getting notification to Laurel Drive. So there's many things going into two questions that you have in front of us that the Laurel Drive thing wasn't even in the question proposals. So that's, I mean, at this time, for time purposes, to get this thing done this year, what do you want from us tonight?
Well, I mean, I think, again, if you're going to go down the road of Laurel Drive, I mean, I think we almost got to reset the clock and start over, which ultimately means we won't get it constructed this year. If we're going to keep going down the road that we're presently on, you know, because we've already held the improvement hearing. I guess, you know, the question is, do we get bids then? Do we just take the total project cost and figure out the assessments based on that and see what kind of repercussion we get at the improvement hearing or the final assessment hearing?
We already got it. We already got the indication that those people are going to challenge it. We have it in writing.
Yeah. So I guess the other, I mean, so the other option is you pull out that 160, or you pull out essentially the cost for proposal 2, and you base your assessments on that. But then I guess the decision needs to be made. How are you going to pay for the 162 feet?
Bids may come in really good, and those 6 or 7 that are opposing it might say, I can live with that, and then sign on to it. So my position, you send out the final assessment roll for the entire project. And we have the hearing, and we see what happens.
Well, I mean, Ron would probably concur. I mean, if we sent out the higher number, we can always bring it down. But I think if we tell them it's going to cost X amount of dollars, we're going to be very hard pressed to go up. So maybe we're better off to keep things rolling. Maybe we're better off just using the total project cost, figuring out the assessments based off of that. And then between now and August 1st, when we hold that final assessment hearing, if City Council finds a way to pay for the 162 feet or some way to cover that, then we can reduce it at that time.
Because I think if we don't go forward, if we have to reset it, we're not doing this project.
Right.
Sure. So, I mean,
I did have a question from an individual, and that is, the way the bid spec reads, still it leaves the window wide open to do it this year, but did you extend the completion date out into next year just in case they would prefer that?
I did not at this time, just because I had talked to 4 different contractors. 3 of them said that this construction season would fit their schedule very well yet, so.
So you did not kick it out
I did
into
not.
next year?
I got basically middle of October for a completion date.
so right now you have your direction.
Yep.
Everybody-
Thank you.
So why don't we come back and gather and where we're supposed to go?
Mr. President,
Yes.
would you mind doing the outdoor
Sure.
rink? Mr. Muehlebrock coaches baseball and they have first pitch in 8 minutes.
Might not be piece of cake.
Number 3, discussion on neighborhood outdoor rink. Mr. Huttunen.
Thank you again. I apologize I didn't ask for that before the meeting started. I didn't see Mr. Muehlebrock here when I came in. So this one is a property in Maplewood First Edition, trying to find my notes. Lot 2, Block 4, I believe. Lot 4, Block 2. It's an open lot that's got a power easement running through it that for a number of years an outdoor rink has been poured on. Primarily poured, operated, maintained by residents that live in that neighborhood. Ms. Nelson got notification this spring from Polk County that it's a lot that is not under the ownership of the city. It was designated as a park with, of course, the power easement that nothing could be constructed on it. But it was never, the paperwork was never filed for it to become owned by the city. So we were told at that time that we couldn't have the outdoor rink on it anymore, which is at which time I contacted Mr. Muehlebrock and let him know that it's not city property, and we were notified we can't do the outdoor rink any further, and kind of left it at that. He took it to the next step of contacting a few county commissioners and getting in touch with the Western Area Power Association, who owns the easement, to see what we need to do to be able to have the outdoor rink. There's a license agreement in there that allows for the outdoor rink to be poured underneath the power easement. And of course, just with the general understanding that you won't be able to construct anything any further than just being able to use the green space in the summer and pour ice in the winter. And that if they ever need to go in to do any work on it, they're going to be working over top of the ice and could ruin it during the winter months. The caveat with that is that the license agreement is in the name of the city, so we would need to claim ownership of the property in order to sign that license agreement and be able to allow the outdoor rink to continue to be placed. So just kind of sharing the information with you from a Parks and Recreation standpoint. we paid for, we being the city, Parks and Recreation, paid $600 this year to pay for loads of water to be brought to get the ice rink started. And then once we got those initial loads down and got the ground frozen and got a base started, the residents, Mr. Muehlebrock included, ran their own water from their houses to continue finishing the project and to be able to maintain it through the winter. As long as an understanding like that was always in place and great, and the residents wanted to have the ice there, and they wanted to continue to put the work into it and man it and operate it, I think it's great that they can do that. I don't see it as being a viable park for Parks and Recreation to, at some day, a couple years down the road, when Mr. Muehlebrock's kids are in high school and don't want to use outdoor ice anymore, to turn around and say, well, Parks and Recreation should continue to operate it and maintain it. I think that we already have better parks on the south end of town that either have already in the past had outdoor ice or could have outdoor ice that are already parks that we could focus our energies on there rather than doing it in this neighborhood. With that being known that we really can't do anything other than just put ice on it. We would never be able to build a warming house there or anything along those lines. So
I did get agreement from WAPA that they would allow us to put I built some boards just as a backstop, and they would allow us to put a little bit more. They just said since we can take those up and down, they were fine with that, because I was just going to build a few more. We're not going to make full boards around the place, just a few more, and we're going to put up a little bit higher for the roadside to stop pucks a little bit better. We learned that chicken wire doesn't stop pucks from these kids. So we're going to set that up a little bit, but they were very good about all that. And then this agreement then allows Reid and I, what this spur discussion is, we need a little bit of dirt work just to put a little berm so we can be more efficient about flooding the area. And then once we have this agreement done, where it's in city ground and Reid, the community can start working together, our local neighborhood and the city can work together. I've got some different grant sources I've been looking at that are some matching grant sources. One problem we've seen for us long term for the community is right now I run about 300 foot of hose. Neighbor runs about 200 some hose to get it maintained. We're looking at the possibility of a matching grant to run a little bit of water to where our water source, to where that water, right now there's a light pole there where we could make some sort of agreement where Park and Rec would be involved on it, but if some neighborhood wanted to take that mantle up, and John and I don't see ourselves going anywhere for the next 20 years, just to be honest. We've already made that commitment to him and I. But that's the only thing we can see long term is just to have a water source so we don't have to run so much hose to maintain that park. And like I said, what I'm looking at that is some matching grant dollars through, there's some Minnesota community action funds that I've identified that I think we can get. And once I get that, I'm not going to put the effort into writing those grants until I know we have city ownership and I can start working directly with Reid.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Talked with Darren a few times about this, and I think it has been a good park over there. I think there was folks before these guys, and then now these guys have kind of taken up the mantle. Obviously, it's kind of right out your front door almost, and it might not be a good, south end park, but it's a good neighborhood park, and I think it kind of shows what can happen and some of the good stuff that can happen when you get some folks that get up and go and do that. We've done the water stuff on the north end. We've done it on the south end a little bit. I know over by St. Augusta, they opened up a hydrant one winter, a couple winters, and poured a rink over there for those folks. And if people are going to be outside playing in the winter, I think we should try to make it as easy as possible. Two questions. To assume this property, is it just a direct transfer of title, or is it we have to buy it, or what's the...
That would be a better question for others to answer. I didn't really even go down that road, but I know the only thing Polk County, I don't know if they told Megan via email or even Mr. Muehlebrock, but they said that they would be willing to help us get ownership of it. The steps to do that, I don't know.
I think right now it's owned by the state, the county oversees it, and, since it's tax forfeiture, the city would have first right to it. So I think it's just a matter of simple.
And then, I guess, and that's, if that's the case, I'm for, the only other thing is that's the winter, we'd have to make sure, you know, mowing and all that kind of stuff, so Reid's guys, I don't know,
Jason's guys.
or Jason's guys are over there, or what, but, you know, we'd have to make sure that we work out what the mowing responsibilities are, and, you know, I'm sure someone over there has a riding mower or something. Right, so, I mean, like I said, it's a nice little spot for kids to, I mean, they're out there all the time.
Mr. Tweeden?
Historically, this is a situation where we got hockey started. In the early 60s, out in the point, groups got together and flooded their own rinks. And in the 60s, we built one warming house below the top of the hill, the one in Stouse Park that we're now going to replace the exterior. That was another one. And that's the way we got hockey started, basically in East Grand Forks. There was one other rink that the kids used to take and shovel snow. We didn't have boards right away. That's by the warming house up by the swimming pool. But what happens on the water situation, the people who furnish the water, they tell the Water and Light office, and they're not charged sewage. Personally, if they get a bunch of kids together and they're skating, I think they learn something. They learn to play together as a team, and I think that as long as these people in that area are willing to put forth the effort, we should assist them. It might be contrary to our normal operation of parks, but these kids are going to all be a little bit more hard-nosed if they learn ice skating and getting along outside. Pardon?
Thanks. I don't mean to be the downer on this, but this is as my job. I am obligated to inform you of some of the other aspects of this. Typically, in my experience, when there's been tax forfeited land, the city takes it over. Usually, we just have to pay the transfer costs for that if we're going to be taking it for a public purpose. That's usually a few $100s, typically, just to transfer the title on it. The issue I wanted to make sure that the council is aware of, though, however, is if the city does take over that land and it becomes city property, that we will also be then liable for anything that happens out there. Any injuries, any of those type of things, any damage will come to the city through the city's insurance, so that will affect us as well. So we just need the council to be aware of that as well.
One thing we are going to do when we get this all done, and we'll have approval of the Reid and stuff. I'm going to have my marketing company put up their rules. We're just going to follow with Rink out there, just to lay out the responsible, respectful, safe for the school district and try and have established rules and etiquette out there. And then obviously behind there, I can look out there and anything on there, and then we'll have ours contact them as an initial contact if there's problems out there. So that's how we were going to address. Obviously, that was a concern we had to liability on there. We, as a neighborhood talk, there was a bunch of people we talked about warming house stuff that could not be done with the WAPA, and obviously a lot of neighborhoods did not want anything major like that because they want to just drop off. I think that eliminates a lot of the headache of not having a warming house.
Sam?
What my recommendation would be is if you're going to go forward with it, we would do something that we typically do is get waivers, participation waivers from the kids and the family members regarding indemnification. Also regarding liability and insurance. Typically, yes, if we're negligent or grossly negligent in what we're doing as a city, we would be responsible. But for recreational purposes, we do have recreational immunity for our parks and those types of things for park and recreation purposes. So we'd have to be. So there is some limitations on the liability aspects if you go that route.
We've got a dozen or so playgrounds and miles of sidewalk, and we operate a pool. So I think the risk is realized, but it's worth it, I think.
You got enough direction?
I do, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Darren.
Move back up to number 2, request for building license. Mr. Gallstad.
Actually, this is more on a request from, I believe there's a letter in the packet from Kurt Tingham. Kurt Tingham is actually the attorney for Folsom Farms.
Right.
This would be regarding the project that they want to expand their potato operation. I did ask or mention to Kurt that it would be helpful if he was here. What he's doing right now is they want to actually get into the ground. They're requesting this group if they would allow a license agreement to allow them to actually build in the right-of-way prior to the street vacation. I'm not advocating for it or against it. I'm just presenting it. The one thing that it would potentially do if this group had any reason that they didn't want to vacate that street would make it very difficult to do so because they would be already in the ground. I do know that from a city standpoint, this is something that is being welcomed by the Public Works Department, specific Jason Stordahl, just regarding the fact that the infrastructure, meaning the sewers, the sanitary sewer, that sort of thing, is going to be turned into a private utility that would be essentially managed or the cost of it would be bore by Folsom Farms. The one thing that I've been very clear on with both American Crystal Sugar and Folsom Farms is that prior to submitting a petition for vacation of the street to the city, which they were both going to do, so you'd have 100% of the property owners, was that they provided an endorsed and executed shared access and use agreement covering the responsibilities for the infrastructure and the sewer. I've not seen a copy of that. We know, and I know from the discussions that there's an agreement. I've seen the agreement. They're actually doing in final negotiations regarding the costs and how it's going to be done. But all that being said, I haven't seen one at this point. So I did tell him that I would talk to the group about it. I did present this or provide this to his letter to Megan, and then it didn't get in the packet, but I do have certificates of survey both imposed over the buildings that are there. If anybody wants to take a look at them, that they provided me the other day. And it shows where the proposed building is going to be, which meets all the setback requirements that have been provided for the city.
I do have one question for you.
Sure.
Forgive me, I don't know their side of it, how they're proceeding with their financing things or not. The state of Minnesota is very difficult to deal with when you finance something to build, and that financial institution needs to file the mortgage and stuff before you can even break ground. I'm not sure if they're putting the cart before the horse on that, if there's going to be an issue, but that is, let's say that we finance a house,
You're
They
talking
cannot
Hannah
break ground.
Green issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not discussed any of those.
Okay.
This is essentially their request and how they're financing it, who they're financing.
Yeah, and I'm just
through.
saying, if they are financing it, their financial institution won't let them break ground, because they won't have legal right to that property and file their mortgage on the property because it hasn't been vacated yet. So,
Unless somebody's going to insure over it, which
Right.
is difficult. But I understand that.
okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Galston? Anybody have any issues if we move forward with that? See none, Mr. Galston?
I'll talk to them about it, and then if they want to have this on the next city council meeting for what's the date, the 5th?
Correct.
The 5th, I'll make sure that I have all the proper documents in place so that you can take a look at it. But I don't have a license agreement in place right now. They were going to draft one. I haven't seen it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Number 5, requesting update to records retention policy. Ms. Nelson.
Okay, I recently received an email from MCFOA notifying me that there were 165 changes, amendments, revisions to the records retention schedule. This is adopted and changed from time to time. And looking back, I have not found actually the resolution that the council adopted, but I did find a piece of paper signed by Mr. Dave Mack back in 1988 notifying the Minnesota Historical Society that we adopted the records retention. What I would like to do is next week just bring a resolution forward, just formally adopting the most up-to-date one. And included in that, it includes the phrase, any subsequent revisions, so moving forward we wouldn't need to do this. Just, I guess if you had any questions, otherwise that's about it.
Thank you. You can generalize, we're talking about 100 and some odd revisions. Is it broadly an effort to expand the retention or reduce the retention, or is it more of a category issue, or all of the
I
above?
don't think, based on what I've seen, it was just kind of going over and looking at the records retention and looking at what might we not need to keep quite so long, what can we get rid of sooner, what should we keep longer, just kind of basically an overhaul of, I don't think they added any categories to it. There is a checklist of the things that they changed, which I briefly just glanced over. I didn't look at it too closely, but it was just basic, just bringing things a little bit more up to date.
Does it cover email retention?
I'm not sure.
'Cause I think it's good policy to have an email retention policy. Whether or not this covers that, I think we should review that policy or lack of policy right in concurrence with going through these as well. Most places say, I believe, 5 to 7 years email retention otherwise. I mean, I don't know what, I know there's ones for banking that are probably shorter, but yeah, I just think it's it's becoming kind of a standard practice.
Do we have, if you want to ask Corey this question, he's listening too, but a Barracuda system that we sort of, that's the retention and keeps them in there, but I don't know if that's a way to retrieve them. That's often, I use that all the time.
You guys don't know the answer to that, but we can find out.
It might be in that policy, that if we have that, that's what keeps it too, so it might be there. Anything else? Number 6, Charter Commission discussion, appointment process.
The last work session, I informed you guys I was going to listen to a webinar about how Duluth, the city of Duluth, finds people for their boards and commissions. It's over 200 people that they have. Most of the webinar was about the software that they use, and it was basically a sales pitch. But I did look into our city website, and there is a form that is available. It can be modified and can be used. And one thing that Duluth does is at every single meeting when there's a vacancy, when something's coming up, if somebody is not going to stay on a board, they announce it. So it wouldn't be just at council meetings, it would be at the planning commission and the library board. It'd be at everybody's meeting to say, hey, we're looking for people, so the word gets out there. But if this is something you guys are interested in, there's a way to have, if someone is interested, we can make this form active. All of the applications would be sent directly to the mayor. The mayor can review them, call the people, and continue with his part of the appointment process, and then bring it forward for you guys to ratify. So,
I think it's a great idea to have this active and being used. I think that's a good thing. One question I do have, can we ask all these questions on here?
I have the same question.
That, I just left it as it was.
Yeah, I figured
Yeah.
that, so that was my legality.
As I was going to go, I want to look at it a little bit closer and revise it a little bit. And then, and since this was under the title or caption of charter, I have been looking a little bit further into the charter commission discussion. I have not been able to actually find a file over at the courthouse because of the record retention policy. They because it was basically a kind of a one-time thing. They don't have a file on it any longer. I still have to look a little bit deeper into my files that I have that were retained. I haven't been able to locate anything regarding the number of commissioners who were actually appointed the original time. I did find a list, or I believe I did find a list of 22 names that were submitted to the court, but I was never able to find out how many were actually appointed, because you can have a spread between 7 and 15. I did make contact with Pat Jacklich and a number of them that I understood were on the original commission, but nobody's been able to really tell me how many were truly on it. And
how many years ago was that?
When Pat was on, I didn't actually ask her the last time that they actually met.
Nobody knows.
But it's been a considerable number of years. So how many so those are some of the questions, since I don't have any historic archive of where we're at. Some of those are the questions that you're going to have to address when you determine how many people you want on the commission, how many names you want to present to the court, and then if the court doesn't make a decision on the appointments within 30 days, then it would come back to this group to make those appointments. But I think you should have at least the underlying number of people that you want on that committee is at least a starting point, determined by this group, if I can't find anything further. But I'm not sure where else to look.
Thank you, sir.
I would just like to make one more comment, Rod, I think you're aware of it. What happened when we had the charter committee, the council at that time made a request that they adopt the laws of 1895 that us, the Red Lake Falls, Melrose, and Cloquet had at that time. They like that particular charter. I don't know if your dad was on the council at that time or not. I can't remember. But you could call on some of those communities to see what they did after that. Those 5. But the existing charter that we accepted got approved by the state has worked out very well. maybe some obsolescence here and there, but if there's sentiment that they want to open it up and try, and they have something in mind, fine.
And I do have a call into the state to see if they have any additional information that I could have, because everything has to have been filed with the state at one point or another. So I'm still waiting on a return call. Mr. Demers.
I guess the other thing we should be thinking about is there any other criteria that we wanted, or any criteria that we want to designate, whether it be geographic or, I guess, political, when I mean political subdivisions, like by ward or any of those type of things. Do we want to do we want to have gender equality issue, any of those type of things that we want to think about? Because if we're going to put those on an application or an online application, you should probably have a form or a field for each of those, so as you get them, you know where they sit in those. So that's the one thing. The second is, so once this commission is enacted and assembled, I thought there was something about they need to kind of come up with their own bylaws. So obviously we don't have any rules or bylaws that are out there. If you can't even find the members, we don't know what their operating procedures are. So one of their functions would be to do that. Is that correct or not?
Well, yeah, I would, yes.
Okay.
Okay, you've got to have some type of ground rules for how you're going to operate.
Okay, and then second, it's kind of a chicken or egg issue thing. So say we decide randomly to appoint 7 people to this commission. Now, would that be something that should be designated in our charter? So would we need to make that as part of what they do as an amendment to the charter, or would that be?
You mean the number?
The number.
I mean, I don't know if you necessarily have to have that by charter. You could probably have that in an ordinance form that states this is what we're doing, this is who we're reporting, and this is, and then adopting those rules. But, I'm kind of going along I'm kind of going along with you on this. I mean, I've made a bunch of phone calls. This isn't something that you do every day. So,
but there's lots of home rule charter.
There's a lot of home rule
Groups.
charter communities out there.
And they all have to have standing home rule charter commissions. So
Yes.
there's people that are doing it. It's just how to.
Yep, and I've got a bunch of feelers out and calls out, and I've talked to the league for assistance. I'm just more specifically right now trying to figure out where we stood when we did ours and where to go forward than I have been on what we're going to do with it once we figure that portion out of it out.
Right, anybody else have anything on that? Look at number 7, discussion on DNR special assessment.
This is more to make the council aware and this board that the River Road special assessment that goes along by where the DNR property is, according to the state rules, the special assessments for state property, they're not bound by them. It's depending on what funds they have available. But we have received word back from the DNR that they are willing to pay the principal on that, but they are not going to be paying the interest, or they don't have the money to pay the interest, or whatever. So the way it looks is we might not even be able to fully dedicate to require them to pay the principal. So if they're willing to pay the principal without the interest, let's say we go ahead and take that, so we cannot compel them. So I'm going to bring this up, and I believe Polk County is just asking for direction on how to proceed from this. So we'll see if they want something formal from the city council as far as a resolution or just a motion.
So you're going to collect $33,000.
3310.
Do they pay it right away, or do they pay it on a schedule?
They're paying it on schedule.
You'd think at least they should. They're not going to pay the interest. They should just pay it up front. Maintenance
The
fund.
city decided
They don't pay interest to the county either, right?
That's, no, they don't have to.
Pure cash money coming in. So,
All right, but I'll see what they want from the, if they want something formal from the city. If not, otherwise we'll just, we will take the principal.
And that also update us with the interest, how much it is and how much it's come.
Well, it would basically is on the bond, right?
But I can get you the amount.
But we would just take it off their assessment in the county, just
Oh,
like if
yeah.
somebody had paid it off.
We'll get you what the interest number is.
All right, update on developers agreement.
Thank you. This was brought forward at the May 23rd work session, and at that point, the question was raised whether the city could utilize the 429 special assessment process for street improvements and only assess interest for a short period of time. The time that was brought forward was no longer than 3 years. The feeling was that this would add an option available to developers that would provide the benefit of having the streets to be completed and the cost known prior to the sales of the lots and the construction of the homes. Therefore, that it would be less of a financial commitment for the developers. You just only have to pay the interest for those first couple of years. So we did run this by our bond counsel, and they stated that you can do that. Says this gives Minnesota state statutes. Chapter 429 requires that the assessments must be payable in equal annual installments for a term of up to 30 years, and that the first installment is payable in the year following the adoption of the assessments. As Bob was mentioning in your discussions, you need to ask the county if they would record the assessments with interest only for 2 years and principal and interest payments thereafter. We have gotten some indication back from the county that they would be willing to do that. So I guess with that, what we're looking for from tonight from the council is if this is something that they are okay with, and if it is, we will add this as option number 6 in the developers agreement for financing options. And we will hopefully then bring this back, the developers agreement, maybe even on the July 5th meeting for adoption for updated developers agreement.
And is that shortening the time schedule then, and that's going to be 20 years, be 18 years?
Yes.
Is that, I don't think that language would be in there, that notification, instead of you have 20 years, you would shorten 18-year time.
Yeah, it'd be more per year, right, but over 18.
Well, I guess I'm just going to have some questions, because if we got this thing on a fast track to be approved next meeting, I'm still a little bit, I'm questioning. Are you just saying that it's going to be an option, or we're going to, or we're going to approve the development agreement?
It's an option.
Adding option 6.
Okay, just add, that's,
Adding that option to the developers agreement. And then if a developer wanted to do that option, we would have to go through and.
okay, but are we, okay, but are we approving the developers agreement? Because if so, I've got many questions on how it's going to actually be implemented. For instance, in the first paragraph, what happens to the other 50%? Who's responsible? Can this, can we, do we have to have these special assessments on board before they start selling lots?
Are you talking about in the financing section, that Jay there, number 1, where it says where they would deposit cash or negotiable securities in the amount of 50%? Are you saying that one? Or
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just kind of the first one, what happens to the other 50%?
That's all been approved, though, right? This no, it hasn't been
this
yet?
is,
Okay.
this is just, I'm just curious on how we actually implement this, if this is what we're going to do, because we're requiring them to take and give us 50%. 50% of what? Is it 50% of an estimate? Is it 50% of the actual cost? Are we going to require them to put them in ahead of time so that we know that, the actual costs that are involved? I'm just a little bit fuzzy on how these options are going to be implemented if we're going to be actually approving the agreement.
Well, I guess
It says contract price, so it has to have been bid.
And I guess we're just trying to get this ready as soon as we can, to try to get it in place prior to us getting any new subdivisions. I guess we could certainly clarify this here as well. Those first couple options were, I'll use the term borrowed from the Grand Forks assessment policy. This is one of the things where we're trying to look to be similar across both sides of the river, so it's a little bit more uniform. So we certainly can contact them and see how they've done those when they've implemented those and put them into practice. Granted, there's probably some quirks with North Dakota law versus Minnesota law.
And with that contract price, I would change that to be project cost instead of contract price, because for the same reason as what I described as before, is if you have a bid for putting all these things out, and that's the awarded bid, and then all of a sudden you run into problems during the thing, well, the contract price was X. Your assessment is probably going to be higher because there's change throughout the project, so I would just say. And
See, the way this
or
thing
maybe it's
almost-
50% of the contract, but they're responsible for any other residual costs up to the entire project cost.
It's hard for me to read because this almost seems like you're requiring to have this all done before they even sell a lot,
We are.
and before they, so that it's all done up front, and that you've got the bids, you've got the project, you've got the development in place, and then they're going to be required to give you 50% of the cash, and then the rest is going to be assessed out and paid for them by over the rest of the life of the project or the assessment. That's what this almost seems to read for me.
That is what the goal
That's
is
what
is
the
to
goal
have
is.
this.
So I'm not sure if that's where we're, yeah, so is that the way we're going with it? Because if we're not going with it that way, then all of this it doesn't flow then. If you're not going to require them to put the infrastructure in ahead of time, then a lot of this stuff has to be tweaked a little bit on the implementation process so that, for instance, we're not allowing them to sell lots, just like we are, like they're doing now, and then when you have your assessment roll, you have individuals that can object to the special assessment, that are being in place instead of vice versa. And that, and actually, in essence, it seems to me that if we're doing it this way, or doing it in a fashion that the developers should be taking whatever numbers, whether they're estimated numbers at 1.25% of the entire feasibility study that we come up with, or the project, they can roll those numbers into the cost of their lots and then have that money bankrolled when they're actually having to pay the assessments. So unless you make them do it ahead of time, we're not getting out of the concerns that this group has voiced in these meetings about putting us as in the middle of all of these things between the developer and the residents that are wanting the infrastructure.
Well, all 6 options basically state that we'll have the bids done. Like, they will know what the cost is of all the improvements.
Well, and then,
It's just a matter of how it gets paid for. But that's how most cities do it, because then the city is up front and notifying whoever buys the lot just how much it's truly going to cost to build a house.
and then if that's the case, then this whole last paragraph talking about 1.25% of the estimate isn't,
Well, yeah, the developer's agreement would be completely different.
then that, yeah,
It'd be thrown out. It would
That-
have to be something completely new.
Yeah, that portion could be taken out then at that point. Yeah, if we're going to agree to those 6 previous options, but that's what was in there now.
Right.
So I guess the question is more, are you interested in the 6th option and moving forward?
and I have no problem with that. I'm just trying to clarify on if we're actually submitting this with this option to be utilized for approval next.
Well, maybe I'm being
Meeting
a little bit overly optimistic.
as a
She's
developer.
shaking her head. I just would like to get this taken care of just so we have it in advance of it, but okay, maybe it'll
I
take a
think what
little
needs
bit
to be
longer.
done is Mr. Gallstead needs to talk to Mr. Murphy and Ms. Ellis.
And that's fine. I just wasn't sure what we were actually doing.
Then bring it back. Mr. Tweeten, you have something, sir?
Are these people on development now, are they all contacting Nancy Ellis first before they do anything? Nancy, are they contacting you at all?
Most are, yes. Some
Except for
don't,
one.
but our developers are contacting us. I haven't received a plat or any questions from any engineering group without them coming to me first.
You do have other engineers drawing plats too, right?
Yes, yes,
So,
yes.
but that's important that she gets a look at it, Ron gets a
Yeah,
look
and
at
I think before Ron and David and I move forward, we're just kind of, my biggest thing right now is wondering, are you interested in adopting these 6 options and having the prices set before the lots are sold? Or is this something that you're just not ready to adopt yet? Because it's going to take some time to prepare all these different developers agreements based on each option, so.
Mr. Grosso gets in
If
first.
it's anything other than the last 12 hours of debate that we've had over this certain situation that will fix it, I'm in favor.
Mayor.
Could we bring the developers in one more time as we're about to finalize this in its final form? They could even be notified and invited to that council meeting, because it will be a big change. And so they should be aware of it. They should have some input to it one last time, I think, before it's ratified by us, before it's finalized.
I think most of them are used to it anyway if they deal with Grand Forks, a lot of things.
We did just have a new development built out there that, where the developer put it in all their infrastructure themselves, and it went very smoothly, didn't even really come here.
The 3 that I have talked to them, one is developing now, one will be developing, and then Prairie, who has developed, they are all in favor of whatever we rank, you know. So to them, if it's up front, then it's easier for them to sell the lot. It's not, some have asked why they have to special assess, or why the city has to install them, because it would be cheaper for them to install them on their own, to which I've replied, please do.
Yeah, that was the last one that went in.
Yeah, as long as it's a city engineer approved, and like Barry said, he said, this would be nothing new as to what we do in Grand Forks. It would only be those who just strictly develop in East Grand Forks where it would be a change. But every other developer is not opposed to this, so.
Okay.
Just
Mr.
a
Demers.
question on the I guess the self-installation. They would still have to have city inspection of the construction too?
Yes.
Okay.
They have to
It's not
be
just
approved.
approval of the spec, it's, okay.
Anybody else have anything?
And that's what happened at that last one.
This one to make sure.
Seeing none, I appreciate it. Move on with that. I do have one more item before we move on to the last one is we have Ms. Ellis asked to put on the AC units for the infield building. Get us up to date what she's found out.
We contacted the 4 that submitted estimates for the rooftop units, and we only received 1 new estimate from Valandry's, which was the exact same price as what they quoted us last time at $17,000. I did speak with one person who submitted a bid that said to accept the McFarland bid because that's a very good bid, and they didn't think that there would be another company that could get close to that. And if we wanted programmable thermostats after the rooftop units are in, after about 6 months to see how they are in fact working, because they think the one was cracked for quite a while, that we could get programmable thermostats installed for a couple $100. So they said that if it were me, I would accept the lowest bid, have those new rooftop units put in, see how they work, and then from there we can see if that fixed the zoning issues or if we in fact then need the programmable thermostats to move forward. So I'm just asking if I can bring those bids forward to the next meeting and go with the lowest bidder.
I don't have a problem with it. Anyone else have a problem?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Move on to the last item, recap of visioning session. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know we're getting a little bit late here. I shouldn't hopefully take too much time here with this. Where we're at on the poster there, the second poster, we are on the second portion, the exploration and analysis portion of our process. We have identified our core values, which are integrity, family, and safety. So where we're at now is understanding these issues and the problem identification. So I guess where I wanted to go through tonight is we have the top 10 items or goals that were ranked in our visioning session. Just go through those quickly, make sure that we kind of understand what they mean and that those are our top 10. And if that is the case, then the next step is to bring forward action items, and that would be done at the staff level as far as how to accomplish and the recommendations to move forward with these 10 goals. I guess with that, if you're okay, I'd just like to go through these here fairly quickly one by one, just to make sure we understand what they mean. Plan for projects within the fund balance. I guess where we took this to mean is our long-term capital improvement plans and our strategic plan for how we're going to any of our what's priority for the city, that we plan for those expenditures and we include those into the budget so that we are not borrowing large amounts of cash for capital improvements, those type of things, that we plan for them so that we are able to pay for them as needed in the long-term plan. Is that sound like it?
To that, I would add, when we would be leveraging funds that have to be administered by the legislature, maybe we could wait until those funds have cleared the legislature and the governor's desk. That would be awfully nice. Just as an example.
Any recent history you're saying, or?
What if they pass the desk and then they take them back, which has happened?
So yeah, sometimes we have to count on folks a little bit outside our jurisdiction.
Okay. The South End Bridge. So I guess what I'd be looking for here is, particularly in the next 3 to 5 years, what would we define as success on that? Would that be having it in the capital improvement plan for both of the states, or an agreement between the city of East Grand Forks and Grand Forks, or that one's might be a little bit difficult to measure.
Is there some effort underway to revise the plan inside the MPO?
Yes, that process is starting, is scheduled to be completed 2018.
I don't remember if it was beginning of 19 or late 18, but yeah.
So the consultant was hired, and they're going to start the process and have public hearings and all that this year.
Re-examine prioritization, Merrifield, 32nd, et cetera?
It's the entire road transportation system, of which we're going to take all the other plans that we've done, kind of meld them into a prioritized by fiscal constraint, by need, and all those type of things, and try to get an overall transportation, I forget what it's called, transportation plan for the MPO. So yeah, it's a lot of the plans that have already been out there. There's not going to be a lot of new added to it, but it's the functionalization of these plans and how to implement them into a process and put numbers to them and all those type of things.
With that particular issue, obviously this is a process that these two cities have to do long-range planning for our transportation needs, and bridges are especially critical that both cities adopt a plan that we can both live with. And is there something over and above the MPO process that we should look at doing to gauge we all know that this is near the top of our priority list. I guess I'd kind of like to know where it is on their priority list. And if it's at 750 and we're at number 2, then we're not on quite the same page. And I guess I don't want to, politics is the art of the possible. If this is something that's, pardon the expression, a bridge too far, then I don't want to go too far down the road until I would like to identify and start a discussion, or at least start a discussion at a level at the MPO, but if it needs to be something that needs some additional work between representatives at a higher level than the MPO, like council president and mayors, city administrators, then that's something I think we could do in addition to what the MPO does.
You want to make sure we have a partner in this deal going forward.
Yep.
Right.
I can tell you that Senator Mark Johnson, when we met here, he beelined it to me and said, I would love to bring the feds into this also. They do have funding. They're looking at infrastructure. You know, President Trump has a commitment for infrastructure. He would love to see us leverage federal dollars, state, maybe county, depending on the locations of the bridges. So, and then don't forget the grassroots, because all these folks we're talking about, most of them inside the MPO, also have a constituency that they represent. And if the grassroots starts to demand a South End bridge, it's going to happen. We'll have to find the funding and put the other ducks in a row, but don't ever forget the grassroots on something like this. Who stands to gain from this? A lot of people. And that has to be activated as well.
I'll give you your answers, Mr.
Well, I would say just to that point about bringing all the financial, I mean, yes, obviously we want to look at local, state, Fed money, but back to Mike's point is we have to really shore up our partnership with Grand Forks and make sure that becomes a priority. When we look at what's going to go, I mean, I think it was about $200 million on just the interstate corridor in the next 20 to 25 years, I think is what the projected need, or there's varying need there, but I think they put out $200 million worth of improvements that they're looking to do out there. So that's where their eyes are focused to a great extent. So one of the things I would say for success would possibly be something, especially I would say even before 3 years, would be maybe to get a working group together with, a couple members from this board, maybe some grassroots type folks, and get some folks from Grand Forks. And if you can get some folks that have that as kind of at least a topic to talk about semi-regularly, I would say that's a win. And to at least start the conversation and say, here's what the benefits are, here's the hurdles, and keep it going from that perspective. And if it's going to be the president and mayor or members of the council, I think we can figure out who that's going to be. But just getting a ongoing working group that just is focused on that, because like I said, or like the mayor said, is you talk about MPO, they're going to be focused on this, a lot of other stuff. If you're going to drill down on one group. So
this Thursday at noon, I sort of tossed the invitation sideways to you, Clarence, and to anyone else who wants to be there. Roland Young and Earl Haugen and I are going to meet to continue the conversation on South End Bridge. Roland, as you know, is really passionate about this, has been for at least a couple of decades, and he would like nothing more than to see this thing take off. And so if anyone would like to join us noon in the mayor's office this Thursday, we're going to continue the conversation and just see where the opportunities might be.
I would also request a destination survey, because I bet you if you drove down Reed's and Belmont with the traffic now, majority of those license plates are Minnesota. And there's a reason why those cones are out there, because the people are complaining that there's too much traffic heading down their roads.
They're having our Big Lynn problem.
Yep,
It's
and
the same problem.
And you can let them know, we'd gladly get off of Big Lynn and Belmont if you help us with that.
And you better include the Minnesota 4th corridor by Phoenix Elementary.
Yep.
They're getting way too much traffic, way
Yep.
more than they should get.
So So, yeah, so I mean, at a minimum, I would start asking for a destination survey to see what those license plates are.
Why don't you extend an invitation to Barry with the chamber, because I think
That'd be another good one.
Megan, would you do that?
I think he already received one of the law, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Assessment policy for the streets and utility. I think we understand that when we are working on that one, particularly for it's in conjunction with the developers agreement, and we're going to hopefully have a more clear assessment policy than our 1 1/4 pages that we have right now. Bring financial reserves to target. We have currently set a fund balance number that we are working towards. Carla will be bringing this forward here in the near future as well. We have had some positive news on that, so I think that's one hopefully we'll be able to cross off here fairly quickly. Expand Civic Center west to the west and refurbish the BFW. This is one that I was hoping to get a little bit more clarification on here as well. It might be a little bit more ambiguous. Anybody would like to speak about that one?
Well, I think this came up based on the conversations that we've had about the refrigeration issues that can take place. If we're going to have to replace the compressors and the floor or whatever at the V and dump all that money in, then why not replace the compressors at the Civic? Why not take a long-range goal of looking at fixing both problems by having 2 arenas side by side and having another facility, maybe at some point in time, taking half of that, making it a wellness center, or adding a wellness center between the 2 buildings at the Civic Center, or utilizing the VFW in a way that can be used by many, many people, walking track, whatever, new senior citizen center piece of it, something to that effect. That's kind of what the we were thinking about it. That's kind of where we're at.
Plus, we have the change of the law for the refrigerated fluids.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And restore trust. This one I like, but this one is very difficult to quantify and to gauge and to I guess track and record. Are there any thoughts on that? I mean, I guess we've started televising. We've got I think we're more open to the public than we have. I don't know if there's any other ideas that we could do for restoring the trust in the process here with the city.
I'll take that. I think this is a very difficult one to quantify and measure. I think all of us would agree that over the past years we've had some issues that have maybe weakened the trust of the public towards us. And I think more for us to be aware that that is an issue and to just strive to take steps like being more open, like being more accessible, more outreach, the change in the process for having an application for commissions. That's a small step. I think taking a look at reforming or updating our charter, that's another small step. All of these things are steps that we consciously can take to achieve this goal. But I think the first thing in building and restoring trust is admit that there's been an issue with it, and I think we've done that. And the fact that it did score towards the middle of our top 10 priorities is is a step in the direction to that restoration. So, hard to measure, but always something that should be something we're always striving to improve.
If I could, I sure love the transparency. Every chance that I've had, even to EDA, should it be televised? And I say, if that's the preference of the group, it's a great connection to have out to the community. I like that this is televised. I like that our council meetings are televised. I love anything we can do to enhance our website. The one thing that I think we agreed to also in our visioning session was to try to become a little more intentional about listening, to try to create, we're giving a great stream of information to our citizens. Have we built a similar flow back? I know each of us can answer our telephone and we can bump into people and they say, come here, I want to talk about whatever. But if we could some way really be intentional about listening, how do we, and we're doing maybe a survey for the deer and whatnot, that's the sort of thing to really garner their preferences and then turn that into our policy. That, I think, would be an area we could still work on to really show this is representative government. We want to know your preferences. We want to take that to this table right here.
Megan has something to add to that.
On our website, we have something called the community voice. And there's one other thing where basically, if somebody has a question, comment, concern, they can submit it. I'm still trying to figure out how to get that up and running. I've looked at the tutorials a little bit, but I haven't had a lot of time to do that. But if that's something you guys are interested, we can get that up and running.
Thank you. Two things. First, to the mayor's comment about listening. I agree fully. Trust is earned. It's something that you do. And one of the experience I did, and I haven't done it this term, but the last term I was on the council, part of my own personal thing that I did is I sent out, I think I tried to do it once a year, but I sent out cards to everybody in the district, had a meeting at, like I was in Ward 1, so I had it at Senior Center. It wasn't 100 people that showed up, but it was 15, usually 15 or 20. Now, we could all do that individually, or as a city, we could say, it's East Grand Forks City's night out to listen, or something like that, and we designate five spots in town, and, granted the aldermen are at large, and the mayor might have to do some running, but we could do something like that, where we designate one night, or one night a quarter, or one night a year, or something, that we're going to go out, we're going to put on a thing, we're going to be out in our wards talking to folks. And you can set an agenda, you could do whatever, but let's hear what people have to say. I don't know. It could be something formal like that, too. So second thing I'd like to say is, while it might be difficult to measure trust as an outcome, we can measure it as an input and the amount of time and effort and energy and those type of things that we're putting into trust. And, one of the things that we could do, and it might sound corny or whatever, but, lots of companies have mission statements, they have mottos or statements of purpose or things. And one of those things that we could do is maybe not have that as our mission statement, but have a trust theme that we incorporate into every city meeting, whether it's, when it's a staff meeting, one of the questions on every agenda is, what are we doing to improve trust? And the more you repeat things, it becomes the culture. And like I said, sometimes it can sound hokey or whatever, but if you do it over and over again, it becomes part of the culture. It becomes part of the question you ask even when you aren't asking it. So I don't know what the exact question or phrase or whatever. I leave that to smarter people. But those are a couple of things we can do, and we can measure that. We can say, yes, we're doing this at every single meeting, or we're doing this. When we get off the phone, did we act in a manner that trusted it? And maybe by every phone we put a little bell or something that signifies trust to the community or something. And I just think if you invest and measure that input, then the outcomes will follow. So that would be my suggestion on measurement of trust. Thank you.
Mr. Belston?
I guess this is more just a general question as sitting here. We got some type of a survey that we're truly, you know, I mean, that we're not trusted? You know, I mean, I know this is something that everybody has talked about, but in general, has there been an issue where people are telling us that they're not trusting us? I mean, that would be something that you would obviously want to have people to do at all times. But I know, like, for instance, the Grand Forks City Council, they had, at least at their event, the State of the City event, there had been a previous survey conducted, and they thought that the council was doing a great job, and, you know, they did a poll on that. And I'm just afraid that because we've had some setbacks in certain areas of the city over time, that the trust level might be from our standpoint, not necessarily from the public. And I'm just not sure if we actually have that information available to us, other than it's us wanting to make sure that we're portraying trust, I guess, if you want to say it that way. Because I haven't heard a lot of negative feedback that that the public generally doesn't trust what the city or the city council is doing, from my standpoint.
Mr. Gordy?
Perhaps the way to deal with this is to conduct a survey, such as they did in Grand Forks, and find out what people think. And then we can know some of the ways that we can act appropriately to make sure that we are causing people to trust us the way we'd like them to trust us and have faith in us as a unit of government.
I think a lot of it has to do with, like Mr. Gulls had said, we did have some setbacks in the last couple of years, and I think a lot of it had to do with us wanting to do the right thing and make sure we're doing it correctly, and maybe perceived by some people and maybe voiced to certain people when they're running for office that was out there. I think that we've done great strides of what we're doing. I think we've especially when we're videoing our meetings. I think looking at different things constantly and making sure that we're improving is the right way to go. And I think it's just something that may be more of a good feel for everyone, that knowing that the constituents are in favor of things that we're doing and making sure that we're being vocal and going through things step by step and making sure they know what's going on. So I think that's just what we're doing, and I think we just need to keep moving forward with it. I think it's something that doesn't go away. It's just something that you should always have in the back of your mind of, you know, doing the right thing and do things right. So.
Thank you. Strengthen the city-school partnership and bond. We've started with that. I'm hoping that this next year we'll be able to maybe go a little bit further with that. I know that we have a new superintendent out there. He's got the school construction going on, and he's been fairly busy. And I know there's some changes going on over there as far as their community education portion of it. I think that's something that, an area in particular that we can partner more on, and they do seem very willing to work with us on that. Let's hopefully try to get sometime once things slow down a little bit.
I think one thing they've done now too, and Mr. Grassley, you can correct me, I think most of the residents in the city, especially if they have children in school, got an email from Mr. Colness regarding the survey and the video. Maybe if you want to, I think that them reaching out to the community, showing their direction of where they want to go. Mr. Colness, and maybe you got it, maybe
I did, yes.
So I don't know. I haven't went through it yet, looked at it, but I don't know if you know anything about it, Mr. Grassel.
All I know is that, you know, Mr. Colness is big on community and trying to get everybody to throw their opinion in and what they would like to see happen, and that's kind of where he wants to go, you know. I know that our superintendent sends an email out almost every single day to every parent, to every staff member. It's either a tweet or an email or something. Maybe something that the mayor and the city administrator could start looking at doing every day as well. That might be something that they could fit into their schedule.
Well, and if you have a list, really honestly, it's a great thought.
Right.
If you have a list of people that would be interested in that, it would be a great connection.
Something that you do not, Megan doesn't do.
Once I said that, I figured out that's something I just added to
I
Megan.
hope Megan
Sorry,
would
Megan.
say, I'm kind of active with email. Email doesn't even bug me. Yep.
The long-term master plan for the parks, trails, and rec. We have identified that as a priority, and I know Reid will definitely be working on that once he gets, I don't know, he's had a couple things happen, the fires come up, but it is on his list to work with us on that. The other one, amend city charter. We've started that. Really trying to get the people on there. So as far as how to amend it and that, I guess that will be part of the group. And then the final one, upgrade city facilities. I'm just interested in any that the council might have right off that they would like to see upgraded or moved.
I mean, to go along with that, I think I started it going out. I met with Jason, we went around and looked at things. I'm going to keep doing that and meet with other departments and go around to the buildings and then walk around, actually. And it was very helpful to do that and got to see some things that you normally wouldn't. You're trying to visualize in your head and you actually can see it, which is great. I think something that everybody should do, that have the opportunity to. They take a half hour. I thought it was going to take me an hour. I think it was 2.5 hours, 3 hours or so. But it was good to see that, to actually go around and see what we actually do have as property and what we do have, the equipment and all that stuff. So that within that building. So
I think another good thing is to think about when the department heads come to us and say, I really think we need to take a look at this and fix this. I'll use the police station as an example. Everything got pushed off for a long time. We'll just throw a $10,000 patch here and a $10,000 patch there, and look at it end up costing us what, $100-some thousand to get in there and fix the roof and the walls and then so I think if we can stay on top of as many things as possible and budget for those, I think in the long run we'll be way better off than coming in with a problem of, we got a leaky roof and
hopefully no new windows.
then the wind.
I think I have what I need.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on what Mr. Murphy's going over? If not, entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Tweeden, second by Grasso. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.